Greetings and salutations, and thank you for clicking on the video. I certainly do appreciate it. This video is a bit of a rant. What I want to do is I want to talk about my position on Linux hardware. That would be the hardware that you would obtain to install Linux upon. And I want to talk a little bit about the different choices out there and why I think some ways to go about obtaining Linux hardware are better than others. And the reason why I'm posting this video is because I got into a bit of a debate with a fella who posted a comment on the video about the Acer Aspire 1 Cloudbook. Now, if you hadn't seen that original video, essentially one of the nice folks out there in the Easy Linux community had an extra one of these and offered to give it to me. And I said, sure, I'll take it. So I did a little video about it, and it's kind of a fun little machine to play with. It's a toy computer, basically. And I'm actually recording this video on that machine, and I'm using the microphone that's built into it. So it's got some things about it that are actually pretty cool. Now, the downsides are the fact that it's only got a 32 gigabyte eMMC SD card on the motherboard for storage. That's not a hard drive. It's not a solid state disk. It is just an embedded SD card, and it is what it is. You can't change it. And the other thing about it is it only has 2 gigabytes of RAM in it, and you can't change that either. However, if you take those two things and put them to the side, it makes for one really cool Linux machine. When it arrived, it had Windows 10 loaded on this machine, and I removed it and put Linux on it with a couple of tweaks to the BIOS. If you want to know what I did, you can watch the original video. Here it is. Search the title. Boom. There you got it. Well, this person had put in the comments that he thought that a Chromebook made for a good basic Linux machine. And I disagreed with him because it's a Chromebook. And we kind of went back and forth on this with some other people commenting on it. And I don't think he quite understood what I was trying to tell him. When you buy a Chromebook, you are buying a machine that was specifically designed to run Chrome OS, which is an operating system that Google has come up with to put on low-end computers. It's essentially Google Chrome, and that's it. It's based on Gentoo. It is a form of Linux. It uses the Linux kernel, but it is not open source. There are vast parts of the system that you're not allowed to mess with or shouldn't be messing with. Many Chromebooks have a chip in them that will not allow other things to run. So it's not just a matter of taking your USB stick with your Linux image on it and then booting up the machine and then clicking the install button and it goes on. It's a matter of having to kind of trick the system to make it work. And he talked about Crouton and he talked about some other things. Now, if you have a Chromebook laying around and you want to do this, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it. What I'm saying is that you shouldn't buy a new Chromebook to try and run Linux on, especially if you are a Linux newbie. And beyond that, I don't like the idea of supporting Google's proprietary little system there by forking over money for hardware that was designed to run their system, because that's what you're doing. The same thing happens if you go to the big box store and you buy a laptop or a low-end desktop off the shelf for dirt cheap that is loaded with Windows 10, and you take it home just to put Linux on it. When you did that, you bought a license for Windows 10. You paid some of that price to Microsoft. Microsoft is proprietary. You are supporting Microsoft's proprietary operating system when you do that. I have a gut aversion to proprietary stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm wearing a tin hat and walking around saying, well, don't use anything proprietary, because even though I was just trashing Google about Chromebooks, I'm using Google Chrome to make this video. I use all kinds of Google services. So it's not that I'm totally, completely adverse to it. It's just that there are some things that we don't have alternatives to that are completely free and open source yet that you can use. So I try and take a practical approach to it. But, I most of the people that I deal with that contact me out of the blue. They see a video. That's what they have done. I mean, I cannot tell you the number of people that have told me, I ordered a laptop and it has Windows 10 on it and I want to put Linux on it. And I was like, okay, I realize that it goes down to ignorance because you don't know that you can buy a computer that doesn't have Windows on it that comes installed with Linux. So therefore, okay, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, all right, so I give you a free pass to some extent on that. However, the real big downside to that is that a lot of the computers that are being sold that have Windows 10 on them are not friendly to Linux. They're not friendly to other operating systems. More and more and more, those machines are being designed to run Windows. There is all kinds of little things going on with the firmware and the hardware on the machine that make it difficult to run anything else. First of all, you've got UEFI. That in and of itself is no big deal. Then you have secure boot. That can be turned off. Then you have other little bits and pieces in the firmware that sometimes present issues. So therefore, people do this and they go and spend $300 or $400 on a computer, blow out Windows or replace the hard drive, and then Linux doesn't work, and then they think, well, Linux just sucks. No, you're just trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. 5 or 10 years ago, it was pretty much easy to say that any PC that could run Windows 7 or even Windows 8, yeah, you could get Linux going, no problem. But as time has moved on and Microsoft has encouraged the hardware vendors that sell things with Windows on them to lock that down more and more, it becomes more difficult to do. I will give people a free pass when it comes to buying used hardware. I will give somebody a free pass if they've bought a machine and they've used it with Windows on it for quite some time, and then they decide that they are going to install Linux on it because that's the machine you got. Maybe you don't feel like making a $500 investment or $1,000 or whatever you're willing to pay on a machine. Let me stop that video. That's okay. I understand that. But if you are going to buy new hardware, then please, by all means, consider buying hardware that is designed to run Linux out of the box. And there are several companies that offer this. So this will make your Linux experience a much smoother thing. I mean, if you're just starting with Linux, you really want to be on that good basic hardware that is going to run Linux well. On the flip side of that, you can get a lot of refurbished computers that are 5 years old to 3 or 4 or 5 years old that do really, really well on Linux. eBay is loaded with them. Now, most of the time when you buy those, they do come shipped with Windows. But it's just that the refurbisher either has an OEM license or he's just sticking it on there and you're going to have to activate it. It's not quite the same as buying a brand new machine from a company like Acer, Dell, or whatever that has an activation, and the licensing is in the price. It's a little bit different. I've bought lots of hardware that way because that's just the way it comes. What are you going to do? I mean, you're going to say I'm not going to buy it because you put Windows on it? No, I'm going to buy it and then I'm going to replace the hard drive and put whatever I want on it. That's the point of Linux, is choice. I mean, so therefore it's okay. So when it comes down to new hardware, then we have System 76. I do not have any affiliation with System 76, although I talk about them a great deal, and they sponsor many people in the community who do the same thing I do, which is post videos and post content. And I think that's wonderful that they do. That's gorgeous. So, when you buy a System 76 machine, it's going to show up with Ubuntu on it, or Pop! OS, which is their new Ubuntu flavor that they're shipping. And that machine is designed from the start to run Linux. So it'll run any Linux distribution. It'll run Linux Mint. It'll run Arch. It'll run any flavor of Ubuntu. It'll run OpenSUSE. It will run Gentoo. It will run anything that you want to put on it. You don't have to stick with Ubuntu, and that's really, really cool. Now, if you want to, you can, and they have great support at System 76 to help you get started with their Ubuntu Pop! OS spin, or they have great support if you want to install Linux on it. They have great support if you want to buy a System 76 machine to put Windows on it. I know for a fact that that is done because the hardware is so good that people buy it, and then the client that they're buying the hardware for absolutely insists on Windows 7. I mean, that's happened. So anyhow, the point of it is that there are companies out there that are creating hardware which is specifically designed for Linux. And then Dell is another company that has a big Linux division. Now they market it to developers, but these laptops come with Ubuntu installed, and you can put anything you want on it. You could put Linux Mint, whatever. A lot of these big workstation developer laptops make great gaming platforms if you're interested in gaming. So you're buying a machine that comes with Linux on it. You're not going to run into problems with the Wi-Fi not working. You're not going to run into UEFI and secure boot issues. You're not going to run into all of this other stuff that you're going to get with a machine that's really tailored to run Windows. That's the point here. And no, I don't support buying things that are really intended for a closed source proprietary walled garden environment and then saying, well, I bought it to run Linux. Buy something that's going to run Linux. Support these companies that are offering Linux hardware with your wallet by buying their hardware. Let them know that that's something important to you, because it is important. That's part of the deal with Linux, is the fact that we're trying to maintain a free and open system. And if the hardware companies are not helping us, then we have to go our own way. And System 76 right now is going through a process where they are trying to get rid of some proprietary crap going on in Intel processors, later Intel processors. And I think that's wonderful. I really applaud them for their efforts on that. So we're trying to keep this as free and open as possible. That's part of the deal, gang. That's what's going on with Linux. It's not just this nifty little operating system that you can throw on your PC and play around with. It's a community and it's a philosophy. And there's a lot more to it than just whether it works on your Wi-Fi or not. Speaking of which, I had a discussion with a fella via email where I was talking about, he was giving me his conclusions about Linux, and he was talking about how he had problems with Wi-Fi on various machines, and one of those machines was a MacBook Pro. That's another one. Linux will run on a MacBook. It will run on Mac hardware. It doesn't run well. The Mac hardware is not designed to run Linux. The people who make Macs don't even think about it. That is an enclosed system. Just like Chromebooks are made to run Chrome OS. It's a walled garden. It's what that is. This hardware was specifically made to run this system. And when you move outside of that, you may or may not run into big difficulties. And so if you have a Mac and you install 3 or 4 Linux distros on it, and it doesn't work with various pieces of the system, you're really not getting the whole story, now are you? Because you're trying to run it on something that doesn't really work well with Linux to begin with. And it's just because it was never designed to. And, there was much more to that discussion that we had about that. But, that was one of the things that I took from it is that, we are all creatures of our own experience. We are prisoners of our environments in a way that if we've only seen Linux run on 2 machines and this distro didn't work and this distro didn't work, but this one did, you would tend to believe that, Solus is the greatest distro in the world. If Ubuntu, Linux Mint, and Arch didn't work for you. Maybe the Solus just happens to be tweaked up perfectly for that particular hardware. But you can take the same test situation on another machine, and the only thing it'll work on is Linux Mint. Or you can go to another one, and the only thing that'll work on it is Ubuntu. Or it may not work well on Ubuntu, but it works well on Linux, Linux Lite. Who knows? It's very strange. It's hard to mate up hardware with the proper distribution. Sometimes you have to kind of poke at it. You have to play with it to figure out what's going to work best for you. And yes, it is absolutely true. Wi-Fi should work equally well on every machine. And it should work equally well with every supported Wi-Fi card. The problem is that there's tiny differences that add up to be huge differences from how this Wi-Fi card interacts with this motherboard and this hard drive, and it affects the entire system Plus, you have a plethora of manufacturers out there with varying degrees of support for Linux. And so, if you happen to get a bad Apple that doesn't have great support, there you go. It's not Linux's fault. It is the manufacturer's fault for not supporting it and or not supporting it well. So it's just the way it is. Um, as we have progressed over the 10 years that I have been running Linux, I have seen huge improvements in hardware compatibility. And it runs well on most everything, but not everything. And that includes old and new hardware. So it's a crapshoot. A lot of hardware that's supposed to run well on Windows doesn't run Windows well either now, does it? And you must take into account, what if you have faulty hardware to begin with? What if that problem that you installed Linux to get rid of, that you were seeing in Windows, reappears on Linux? It's probably due to hardware. So there's a lot that plays into it. There's a lot that goes into that whole situation. And it's kind of a moving target to figure out what the best way to go is. Which is why I just stick to the basics most of the time and just say, here, if you follow these steps, chances are it'll work, but there ain't no guarantees. Hardware's different, and people's attitudes are different, and how they react to it. It all makes a difference. So there you go. That's what I wanted to say in this video about that, is that I think that if you care about freedom, and if you care about the open source movement, you care about what Linux is, then if you're going to buy new hardware, you need to be buying hardware that's going to be running Linux. I don't have the funds to buy a brand new machine. So therefore, I buy used stuff. I cobble it together to keep it going. I buy junk, and I keep the junk going. I have 5 computers in my house at this point. They all run Linux Mint 18.3, and it's going quite well with that. But they're old. They're junky. It's kind of like, I like to tinker. I like to maintain. A lot of people don't know how to do that or don't want to do that, and I understand that. So if you're going to buy a new computer, get one with a warranty, get one with good support, buy one from a company that is going to be shipping Linux to begin with. System 76 is an example. Dell is an example. I don't know about the state of HP these days. I've heard mixed things about that. If I was going to buy a brand new computer right now, I'd buy from Dell or System 76, period. I know Dell machines really well. I've owned them for years. And they're like tanks. They work really well. System 76 hardware is also awesome. So those would be the 2 that I would choose from. And it's just a Google search, and then you could find it. So anyway, before I wrap up this little discussion, I do want to talk a little bit about the CloudBook, because I'm doing the video here on the CloudBook. Believe it or not, this little machine has been really fun to play with. And it is actually quite functional. Right now I'm capturing video, and Google Chrome is open. And you can see that I'm using a lot of memory, and the processors are maxed out. The battery life on this thing is pretty awesome too. I'm getting about 4 or 5 hours of battery life, and that's watching videos and stuff. So that's pretty cool as well. And like I said, there's no local storage on this machine. So what I have done is I have used SSHFS in a script to give me a share. So watch this. If I click on this, it should open up, and then I will get... Are you going to open or just make an idiot out of me? Click, click. Let's go. There we go. You see, this is sharing a music directory on one of the workstations that's up and running all the time, because there's no room to put all the music that I have on that machine. And that's not all the music, but it's kind of like my own personal little goodies library there. And there's no room to put it on this machine because it's like 32 gigabytes. And so therefore, I'm just sharing it over the network. And then I sit here on the terminal, I open up a terminal and use my SSH shortcuts to jump into other people's machines and see what's going on. And I can be sitting on the couch watching TV doing this. So it's pretty cool. Like here's what's happening on the Dell machine, the oldest Dell that I have running right now. And it seems to be working. And you can see that Cindy is logged in and she's playing with it. So there you go. I can control my little Linux world from here. So it's been a very fun machine to play with, that is for sure. So thank you once again, William, for sending it on. Okay, gang, I am going to wrap this up. I hope it came out well. I hope it didn't break up on the way. I've not done a big long video on this machine. We'll see what happens. I just wanted to get that out there. And your comments are always welcome, except that when your comments start to get to the point where you're starting to call names, they will be deleted. I stopped talking to people at that point, and unfortunately, I've had a couple of little conversations that have gone that way. I don't take well to being called a jackass, a retard, an asshole, and worse. And I don't like people doing that to other people in the comments. So whenever I see it, it goes poof. That's when the conversation ends. I may vehemently disagree with you. I might think that you're a complete idiot. Very seldom, if ever, do I ever resort to calling somebody a name. I will not say that I have never done it in a bad moment when I wasn't thinking straight, but I don't do that. So, keep your comments civil, and they will stay. Keep your comment, go into calling people names, just general nastiness for nastiness sake, or making things personal, and they will go poof. Okay. Check out freedompenguin.com. Lots of great stories coming up about Linux. Lots of Easy Linux content is being distributed through there as well. Check out Easy Linux on Facebook. Check out Easy Linux on the web for contacting me. That's really the most surefire way to get a hold of me. If you leave messages on Facebook these days, or even YouTube comments, I'm having a hard time seeing all of those. It's just the way the services work. But emails, if you use the contact page on Easy Linux, I'm going to get them. All right, gang, I'm gone. Thanks for watching.